Imagine a city that suddenly goes quiet. Sirens stop, construction pauses, streets fill with posters, white on red, for the greater good. At first, it sounds comforting, like a blanket around a cold thought. If we just aim higher, if we sacrifice a little, we save a lot. You've seen smaller versions. A manager cuts half the team to save the company. A parent withholds the scary truth to protect the kids. We tell ourselves it's noble. We tell ourselves it's necessary. Sometimes it is. But there's a thin line. What if the greater good becomes a password that opens any locked door? What if it blurs what good means and who the we actually is? What if it becomes a mask power wears when it wants to stop asking permission? Our thesis is simple. The idea of a greater good is powerful, too powerful to leave undefined. From Plato's Republic to Orwell's asterisk, 1984 asterisk, people have tried to use it to organize cities, measure happiness, and keep order. Sometimes it helps, but when it loses sight of people, it breaks. In this episode, we'll learn how the phrase goes wrong, how to recognize the moment it does, and how to put guardrails on our better angels. One line to keep in your pocket. If the path to the greater good requires no consent, no limits, and no memory of the people it harms, it isn't the greater good, it's just power. Why do we fall for the phrase? Because big promises soothe fear. Because math feels clean when life is messy. Because the future is hard to picture, and a simple story outshouts a complex caution. We are primed for shortcuts. We want a single lever to pull. We mistake volume for truth. The greater good sounds like a lever. Let's start at the beginning. Plato writes his Republic after a messy war and a failed democracy. He wants a city that lasts. He imagines guardians trained from childhood, loving truth, hating corruption. But unity is fragile. And so Plato suggests something he calls noble, a noble lie. A myth that everyone is born with a metal in their soul, gold, silver, bronze. If you believe it, you accept your role. You don't resent. You serve. To Plato, it's a story told for the city's sake, a useful fiction. If leaders lie so the city holds together, perhaps it's worth it. But listen deeper. A lie, even for harmony, is a lie that decides for you what you may know. It treats citizens like wards, not partners. It replaces consent with choreography. Plato adds another image, the ship of state. He worries that in a democracy, sailors fight for the wheel while the true navigator is ignored. So he imagines philosophers steering while others obey. It's elegant in theory, but the sea he sails is human complexity. Even a wise captain cannot know each passenger's storm. Imagine being the child of bronze who could have been a poet of gold. You don't get to test it. The story already tested you. Imagine a physician who withholds the diagnosis to spare you worry. Days pass that you might have used to heal. Care without truth disrespects the one it claims to protect. This is how the greater good first slides. It starts with care. It ends with management. A lie for your own good still subtracts your voice. Centuries later, another idea arrives. Utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham makes an audacious claim. Ethics can be math. The right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Count pleasures, subtract pains, choose the bigger sum. On its face, it's humane. It asks us to look beyond ourselves. And yet, what we can count begins to control what we can see. Bentham's famous building, the Panopticon, captures this. A prison designed so a single guard can watch every inmate at any time. Perfect oversight. Cheap order. The many protected by the ever-seeing few. But if you live under a possible gaze, you start to police yourself. Your inner life shrinks. You perform. You don't live. The greatest number may be safer, but they are not necessarily freer. Consider triage in an emergency room. Doctors quickly rank who gets care first to save the most lives. In a narrow window, that calculus is merciful. But if you smuggle triage into every policy, you normalize sacrifice. Save the most turns from a temporary procedure into a permanent attitude. People become cases. Cases become lines on a chart. Try this sentence on your tongue. It's worth your privacy because, together, we gain. Who decides the trade? Who gets to be the watcher? Who gets their life reduced to a data point? Numbers help. But numbers cannot feel pain. They also cannot feel dignity, shame, or hope. A spreadsheet can tell you how a policy works. It cannot tell you if it was decent. When the calculus forgets the faces, it stops being moral math. There's an even sneakier slide, the metric trap. Economist Marilyn Strathern sharpened a lesson later called Goodhart's Law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Police want safer streets, so they target fewer reported crimes. Hospitals want faster care, so they target shorter wait times. Schools want better learning, so they target higher test scores. And people smart, scared, ambitious people game the numbers. Tech gives vivid examples. Platforms want connection, so they target engagement. Click-through, watch time, daily active users. Soon, the system learns that outrage outruns nuance. We say it's for community, but the algorithm rewards what keeps us scrolling, not what keeps us whole. We think we are optimizing the good. We are optimizing the scoreboard. The real things trust, curiosity, dignity, get squeezed because they're harder to measure. The greater good gets turned into a dashboard, then the dashboard into a whip. The harmed become invisible twice. First, because they are few. Second, because they don't fit a metric. A similar trap appears inside teams. Leaders promise for the team, while celebrating visible outputs. Deep work that reduces future risk gets ignored. Mentoring disappears because it doesn't ping the dashboard. The culture gets shallow, then brittle, then mean. So here's a rule of thumb. If your plan needs a spreadsheet but cannot survive a conversation with the smallest person it hurts, it's not the plan. What gets counted gets managed. What gets ignored gets hurt. Let me tell you a story. It's a village in a green valley. A wall of water is building in the mountains after freak rain. An engineer has a brutal idea. Blow a channel through a small ridge. Most of the flood will spin away from the town. 5,000 people will stay dry. But the channel cuts through 50 homes at the edge. They'll be destroyed. Statisticians say the plan saves hundreds of lives in expected value. The mayor is ready to sign. Sounds clear. But we walk the ridge. We meet a baker who spent 10 years paying off her oven. We meet a teenager who just planted a soccer field with his father. We meet an old man who keeps the town's stories in boxes under his bed. The mayor hesitates. She asks 3 questions. First, do the families at the edge get a vote? Second, if we choose this, do leaders stand with them physically, legally, financially on the worst day? Third, is there truly no other way, even if it costs more time, more money, more complexity? They tweak the plan. They add a second, smaller channel, more earthworks, a volunteer brigade. The village loses 20 homes instead of 50. The town sets up immediate compensation, not as pity, but as a debt. And the mayor schedules a public review after the flood to ask, was this the least harmful way? The flood comes. The valley holds. The edges hurt but held. The lesson isn't that sacrifice can be avoided. It's that it should be faced, named, and shared. If you can't look the sacrificed in the eye, you don't have a greater good, you have a gamble. Now, the warnings from the century that loved planning. In the early 1902nd, many smart people adored the phrase, the fitness of the population. They wrapped prejudice in lab coats. Policies were made in the name of better averages. The individuals who didn't fit the averages paid the price. The story was elegant. The lives were not. Later, in moments of fear, nations passed emergency measures. Some were needed, but a pattern repeats. An exception is declared. Oversight loosens. The goal is noble: safety, order, peace. Then the sunset date moves. The tools built for a crisis remain on the table after the danger fades. Emergency becomes habit. Habit becomes structure. No one person decided it, but no one stopped it either. Crisis psychology explains why. Under threat, we narrow our circle of care. We accept harsher trade-offs. We defer to authority and speed. Later, the emergency feeling fades, but the policies don't. Leaders fear the blame of rolling back more than the cost of keeping. The ratchet clicks. Rights, once tightened, rarely loosen on their own. What's the principle here? A real crisis may justify strong action, but the stronger the tool, the tighter the bound. Every emergency needs a clock, a ledger, and a witness. Before we reach fiction's warning, listen for 3 red flags in real life. First, it's inevitable. No plan is inevitable. Inevitable is a word that shuts the door on alternatives. Ask to see the real trade-offs. If there were no choices, there would be nothing to justify. Second, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Privacy is not a confession of guilt. It is the space where the self grows. A home has walls not because its owners are criminals, but because love needs a room. Third, it's only temporary. Temporary without a date is permanent in disguise. A small temporary measure multiplied by years becomes a large, quiet change. Write the date down. Make it someone's job to end it or to argue publicly for renewal. These phrases are not evidence. They are anesthesia. Whenever you hear them, slow the discussion and wake the room. All of this echoes in a book that feels like a warning label glued to the idea of a greater good. George Orwell's Asterisk, 1984 Asterisk. He shows a world where the party's good is the only good that counts. Slogans flip meanings. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Language gets bent until it lies easily. Doublethink appears, holding 2 opposites as true if the party requires it. Newspeak, the reduced language, does more than censor words. It shrinks what can be thought. Fewer words, fewer thoughts. If you cannot name a private life, it is easier to steal one. If you cannot say injustice, you settle for mistake. What does this have to do with us? When a system insists that the collective must be protected at any cost, it begins to choose costs it never has to pay itself. The result is not a healthy whole. It's a frightened machine. Winston's tragedy in Asterisk 1984 Asterisk is simple. He is punished for wanting a private life, for wanting a small, unapproved good, love, a diary, a memory that doesn't fit the party's plans. If the greater good demands the death of small goods, it becomes a cult of size. When someone owns the dictionary, they own the good. So how do we use the phrase without letting it use us? We need a toolkit. Not to kill the idea, but to make it answer questions. First, define the good, plural. Say what you're trying to protect. Say what you will not trade away. Name the values that do not have prices. Basic rights, consent, bodily security, honest speech. If your plan requires violating one of these, stop or treat it like a moral bankruptcy that must be repaid. Second, apply a harm principle with side constraints. Yes, minimize total harm, but never by deliberately targeting innocent people as tools. Ends do not justify means that erase persons. If someone must bear a burden, they remain a subject, not a resource. Third, require representation and voice. People affected must have standing in the room, not a survey, a seat. If the burden will fall on a few, their no matters more, not less. And if you proceed, the process records both dissent and rationale in plain language. Fourth, demand proportionality and least intrusive means. Ask, is there a path that protects the good with a lighter footprint? It may be slower or costlier. Good. Speed is not a virtue if it tramples the people it claims to serve. Fifth, add reversibility and sunset. If you change a rule for now, attach a date when it expires, unless re-argued in public. Build off-ramps at the design stage. Design for rollback, not just rollout. Sixth, keep a ledger, transparency, and audit. Define the metrics you will use, then add stories to those numbers. Commit to a post-mortem, held in daylight. Let outsiders test your claims. If the policy helped the many by harming the few, the ledger should say who, where, and how support was delivered. Seventh, share burdens and offer compensation. If the project benefits all but hurts some, the all owes the sum. Not charity, justice. Pay quickly, fairly, and with dignity attached. Eighth, check second-order effects. What habits will this policy teach? Will it train people to lie? To hide? To tell on neighbors? A clever plan that corrodes trust is salt in the soil. Ninth, use the test of the switch places. John Rawls called it a veil of ignorance. Would you accept the rule if you didn't know which role you would play? Would you consent if your child were likely to be on the edge of the plan, not at its center? Finally, scale this down to daily life. In a family, for the good of the kids, can silence a partner. Add voice. Add truth at a level they can handle. At work, for the team, can hide exploitation. Add limits. Add consent, even if it slows delivery. In creative work, for the audience, can erase the artist. Add boundaries. Guard the private spark that lets you make anything at all. That's the toolkit. Here it is as a pocket check. Define plural goods, protect basic rights, give affected people a seat, choose the least harmful means, add sunset and reversibility, keep transparent ledgers, share burdens, watch side effects, pass the switched places test. None of this is perfect, but it beats a slogan. We began with posters on a silent street. For the greater good. The phrase isn't evil. It's a promise that must be negotiated, not assumed. Because the whole worth saving is made of the smallest parts. The faces, the names, the lives no one put on a poster. So here's the takeaway. Use the greater good, but make it answer questions. Honor the small goods it depends on. Build policies that a single citizen could explain to a child without shame. And whatever you build, keep one line close. The greater good does not shrink the person. It makes persons safer to be themselves, together. That is how the phrase stays noble. That is how it stops being a mask. The greater good is only great if it stays good to each of us.